the shadows that waits in silence. Claire arrived at the old countryside house just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of damp earth and pine. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet, but she welcomed the silence after the constant noise of the city. Yet, as she unpacked her belongings, a subtle unease crept in. The corners of the rooms seemed darker than the fading light should allow, and every shadow felt unusually still, almost as if it were holding its breath. That night, as Claire lay in bed, the silence around her deepened, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood settling. Her eyes darted toward the window, where faint shapes seemed to shift just beyond the glass. She told herself it was her imagination, a trick of the darkness playing on tired eyes. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a presence that lingered patiently in the quiet, waiting for her to notice. Days passed, and the shadows grew more distinct. They didn't move with the wind or flicker with candlelight. They remained still, poised at the edge of her vision. Conversations with herself and attempts to rationalize the feeling did little to ease her mind. The house, once a place of refuge, began to feel like a trap where silence was a warning, and the shadows were patient sentinels watching, waiting for something she couldn't yet understand. One evening, Claire followed a faint sound, barely a whisper, down the narrow hallway. The shadows seemed to thicken as she moved forward, wrapping around her like a cold mist. At the end of the corridor, she found an old mirror, its surface clouded and cracked. As she stared into it, the reflection shifted, revealing not just her image, but the faint outline of a figure standing just behind her, its form blending seamlessly with the darkness. Heart pounding, Claire spun around, but the hallway was empty. She realized the shadows were not just tricks of light, they were echoes of something that had been waiting in silence for years. The house held memories too quiet to speak, yet loud enough to be felt. With every breath, the shadows seemed to draw closer, inviting her to listen to their stories, to understand what had been lost in the silence. In the following nights, the boundary between reality and shadow blurred. Claire found herself talking aloud to the darkness, sharing fragments of her life, as if the shadows could answer. Sometimes, she thought she heard a soft, almost inaudible sigh in response, a breath of the past reaching out through the silence. Though fear lingered, a strange comfort grew in the presence of these quiet watchers, as if the shadows only wanted to be acknowledged. One morning, Claire awoke to the first light filtering through the curtains, the house feeling lighter, less oppressive. The shadows had not vanished, but they no longer clawed at the edges of her vision. Instead, they seemed to settle, patient and still, like guardians who had finally found their voice in her presence. The silence remained, but it was no longer an absence. It was a space filled with waiting, watching, and perhaps even understanding.